The morning sun filtered through the bamboo leaves, casting delicate shadows along the stone path. Ethan, a young artist seeking recognition, walked slowly through the garden of an ancient Buddhist monastery. His mind was restless, filled with doubts and dissatisfaction. He had spent years perfecting his craft, yet he always felt inferior to others. Every achievement seemed small compared to the success of those around him, and the feeling of never being good enough consumed him. His desire to be admired led him to constantly compare himself to those he deemed superior, and this quiet need for validation prevented him from seeing his own journey clearly. That day, the old monk who tended the temple noticed Ethan from a distance and saw the weight on his face. Without saying a word, the wise man gestured for him to follow. Intrigued, Ethan accepted the silent invitation, unaware that this encounter would forever change the way he saw life. As they walked through the grove, the monk pointed to the trees around them and asked a question that seemed simple but held a profound lesson. Ethan had no idea that he was about to discover how constantly comparing himself to others was blocking his life in ways he had never imagined. Ethan followed the monk in silence, feeling the gentle breeze whispering through the trees. The old master, named Thomas, stopped in front of a towering oak tree, beside which stood a delicate cherry blossom. With a serene smile, he asked, "Ethan, why doesn't this tree try to be like that one?" The young man frowned, confused. "Because that would be impossible," he replied. Thomas nodded. "Exactly. Each tree grows in its own way without comparison, simply being what it is. But we as humans insist on measuring our worth by looking at others as if we were meant to be copies instead of unique expressions of life." Ethan remained silent, reflecting. He began to realize that his discontent did not come from a lack of talent, but from the weight he placed upon himself by constantly comparing his journey to those he believed were better. As they walked, they came across a young monk named Daniel, who was patiently sweeping the courtyard with careful attention. Ethan watched for a moment before commenting, "That seems far too simple for spiritual training." Thomas smiled. "Look more closely." The monk swept without haste, without glancing around, without worrying whether others were ahead or behind. He simply focused on his own task. When you compare yourself to others, your mind drifts away from the present and gets caught in a race that has no finish line. Thomas explained, "Everyone has their own pace and their own path. If you try to walk someone else's road, you lose your way and forget where you truly need to be." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. How many times had he shifted his focus to someone else's journey, failing to appreciate his own progress? He remembered his childhood friend, Michael, who, despite not being a top student, always found joy in the little things. As kids, Michael would draw with enthusiasm, even though his sketches were far from perfect. Ethan, on the other hand, would get frustrated when he saw more talented artists, until he eventually gave up drawing, convinced he would never be as good as he wanted to be. Years later, Michael became a happy illustrator, while Ethan, trapped in comparison, had never truly felt satisfied with his progress. The pursuit of perfection in the eyes of others can blind us to the beauty of our own journey, Thomas said, as if he had read Ethan's thoughts. If you measure your life by someone else's ruler, you will always feel inadequate. Ethan took a deep breath. For the first time, he realized that his struggle wasn't a lack of skill, but a lack of acceptance. He had compared himself so much that he had failed to see the unique value of his own path. Thomas continued, "When a flower blooms, it doesn't worry about whether other flowers are taller or more vibrant. It simply blossoms, and that is how your journey should be." Ethan looked at the cherry blossom again. Now he understood. His purpose wasn't to be better than anyone else. It was to grow in the direction that was meant for him. His heart filled with a newfound lightness, as if at last he was ready to move forward, free from the weight of comparison that had held him captive for so long. That afternoon, Ethan sat under the shade of the cherry blossom tree, watching the petals drift gently in the wind. For the first time, he didn't feel envious of the towering oak beside it. He realized that his entire life had been a constant race to prove his worth, always measuring his progress against that of others. But in that moment, he understood something essential. It wasn't his art that had been limiting him, but his own perception of it. He had always sought external validation when in truth, his journey had value in itself. The silence of the garden seemed to affirm his thoughts. The sound of the wind rustling through the leaves felt like a whisper of wisdom. He didn't need to be like anyone else. He only needed to be himself. Thomas, who had been watching from nearby, smiled as he noticed the peaceful expression on the young man's face. "I see you found your answer," he said, sitting beside him. Ethan nodded. "I spent so much time trying to prove my worth that I forgot to appreciate it," he replied. The monk picked up a fallen leaf and placed it in Ethan's palm. Every leaf falls at its own time. No rush, no comparison. That is how your journey should be. You don't need to hurry it or shape it to match someone else's pace. Just keep moving forward, without fear. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, allowing those words to settle deep within him. He understood now that the greatest obstacle in his life had never been a lack of talent, but a lack of acceptance. When he opened his eyes, something inside him had shifted. The weight of comparison was beginning to fade, replaced by a sense of lightness and gratitude. He stood up, and for the first time in a long while he felt an urge to create. Without fear, without haste, without worrying whether he was better or worse than anyone else. His purpose was never to be the greatest artist in the world, but to express his truth through his art. With a genuine smile, he turned to Thomas and said, "I think I'm ready to bloom in my own way." The monk nodded, pleased. Ethan left the garden with a new perspective on his life. Challenges would still come, but now he knew. The only person he ever needed to compare himself to was the person he had been yesterday. Each of us has a unique path to follow, yet we often stray by looking too much to the sides. Constant comparison steals our peace and keeps us from recognizing the value of our own growth. Like Ethan, we spend so much time measuring our progress against others that we forget to appreciate what we have already achieved. But the truth is, we don't need to be better than anyone, only true to ourselves. Like the cherry blossom and the oak tree, each grows in its own time, in its own way. When we accept this, we find the freedom to evolve without hurry, without fear, and without the weight of dissatisfaction. And perhaps that is the key to a lighter, more fulfilling life. To stop comparing and start blooming into who we were meant to be. If you've ever felt small in the face of someone else's achievements, remember the leaf that falls at just the right moment, neither rushing nor resisting the wind. Your journey has its own perfect rhythm, and all you need to do is trust it. Let go of the need to prove your worth and simply be who you are. True growth happens when we stop looking at others and start focusing on our own path. And if this reflection resonated with you, continue this journey with us. In our next video, we'll share another lesson to help you find balance and inner peace. See you there.